In February 2008, the body of 38-year-old police officer Lyla Porter was discovered in her home in Hanover, New Hampshire. An investigation quickly uncovered a shocking secret: her dangerous relationship with police officer Alan Hayes. What began in December 2007 at the New Hampshire police training camp led to bad decisions, betrayals, and ultimately, irreversible tragedy. At 6:45 a.m., Lyla's teenage daughter, Emily, found her mother lying motionless in a pool of blood on the kitchen floor. A single bullet had pierced her chest, and her police-issued gun lay casually by her side, a scene carefully staged to look like a suicide. Emily, panicked and shaking, called 911. The operator's calm voice contrasted sharply with the little girl's muffled cries. Within minutes, state police and investigators were on the scene, led by Detective Garrett Lynch, a 25-year field veteran. But he knew something was wrong when he stepped into the house. Lyla's gun was clean despite the blood spatter around it. There were no signs of forced entry, no suicide note, and most importantly, the sense of a hidden life. Detective Garrett Lynch had worked his fair share of complicated cases, but there was something different about the death of Officer Lyla Porter. Not only was it brutal, but it was also the cracks in her seemingly perfect life. Lyla Porter, 38, was known as a hard-working, principled cop. She joined the force at age 20, struggling to make a name for herself in a male-dominated field and as a resilient single mother. Emily was her world. Despite working long shifts and sometimes staying late, she never missed parent-teacher conferences, school events, or the traditional Friday night movie night. Her coworkers describe her as assertive and demanding, yet warm and genuine, someone willing to help even after a grueling day on patrol. But Lyla carried burdens she couldn't share behind the badge and uniform. After a bitter divorce, she struggled with loneliness, yearning for connection. And that's when Alan Hayes entered her life. Alan Hayes, a senior police officer in his 40s, was the first to show interest in Lyla. At first, it was just after-work chats, gentle words of encouragement. But gradually, the relationship took a turn neither of them could have expected. Little did Lyla know what she thought was a comfort would be a path to tragedy. Lyla can't help but be drawn to Alan Hayes. He's a natural charisma, a respected cop, a calm leader, and a clean record after nearly 2 decades of service. Alan is often praised for his acumen in stressful situations, making him trustworthy and authoritative. What begins as a simple friendship quickly deepens. On the surface, Alan's marriage to Deborah, a dedicated teacher known for her charitable work in the community, seems perfectly stable. They have 2 young sons, and perfect family photos regularly appear on the local news, the image of an ideal family everyone admires. But behind closed doors, the truth is different. Alan confides in Lyla, telling her that his marriage no longer makes him happy and that he feels trapped in an empty life. Lyla, in turn, opens up about her loneliness, her fear that she is unworthy of love, that perhaps she is destined to be alone forever. Their relationship is passionate but strained. Lyla wants more than stolen moments and whispered promises in the dark. She wants it all. She pressures Alan to leave his wife, saying they can build a life together, but only if he's willing to take the risk. But Alan hesitates. He has too much to lose: a stable home, a place in the community, and a fulfilling career. Leaving Deborah is not just a personal decision, but a move that could destroy his entire life. And as the tension between them grows, the small cracks in their relationship become irreparable fissures. On February 14, 2008, Detective Garrett Lynch and his team started piecing together the complicated puzzle of Lyla's life. Early in the investigation, Emily Porter, Lyla's daughter, provided a crucial lead. She told of repeatedly overhearing arguments between her mother and a man who worked for the agency. The information was vague enough to steer the investigation in a new direction. Detective Lynch and his team dug into Lyla's phone records, emails, and work diary. What they found changed the entire course of the case. Explicit emails between Lyla and Alan emerged, startlingly showing an increasingly dysfunctional relationship. In one email, Lyla expressed frustration blaming Alan for his hesitation in leaving his wife. In another, Alan begged her to be patient, saying he needed more time. But their tone changed over time, from passionate to tense, from expectant to pressing. Lyla grew impatient. Alan felt increasingly cornered, and as the detectives traced their final text messages, a chilling truth emerged. On February 14, 2008, Alan Hayes was called in for questioning. The winter morning was chilly, and the atmosphere in the interrogation room was equally tense. Alan arrived in his police uniform, but his usual composure was gone. Detective Lynch watched him closely, picking up on every little detail as he began to ask questions. At first, Alan denied involvement with Lyla, insisting that their relationship was only professional. But then, the emails and texts were laid before him. The evidence was undeniable. The determination in Alan's voice began to crumble. He sighed, bowed his head, and admitted to the affair. But he immediately tried to downplay its seriousness, calling it a mistake. What he didn't know was, this was no longer just an affair. It had turned into a murder charge. As the investigation delves deeper into Alan Hayes' personal life, it becomes clear that he is much more complex than the perfect public persona he presents. Alan married Deborah when they were both young. He was an ambitious recruit at the police academy, and she was a dedicated teaching assistant. On the surface, their life seemed perfect. Family vacations at the beach, community barbecues, Christmas cards sent to almost everyone they knew. But behind the facade was a different reality. Alan's career quickly consumed his time, leaving little room for his family. Deborah, left behind, sought to compensate by taking on charity and community projects, trying to fill the void left by his absence. They were no longer a married couple, but two people living together politely but apart. Things got even more complicated when Alan began an affair with Lyla Porter. The stress of a dying marriage, the demands of work, and a passion for Lyla pushed Alan to the breaking point. In the weeks leading up to Lyla Porter's death, Alan's colleagues began to notice subtle but disturbing changes. He became irritable, lost his temper in meetings, and even yelled at subordinates, a rare occurrence for a man once known for his composure. Some assumed it was simply work stress, but in retrospect, Alan was slowly breaking down under the weight of the secrets he had tried so hard to hide. Then the autopsy revealed a horrifying truth. The medical examiner's report concluded that Lyla had been shot at close range, but the angle of the shot made it impossible for her to pull the trigger herself. This meant that the suicide was an elaborate setup. This was no longer just an affair that ended in tragedy, but a murder with a purpose. The investigation was no longer about personal troubles, but had turned into a hunt for a killer. It was clear they were dealing with a murder, and all signs pointed to Alan Hayes. The big break came on February 20, 2008, when investigators searched Alan's car and discovered a jacket with traces of gunpowder residue. This finding, combined with CCTV footage from a nearby traffic camera, showed that Alan's car had been less than half a mile from Lyla's house on the night of the murder. When questioned, Alan claimed he was just on routine patrol, but records showed that he had left his shift hours earlier, a suspicious detail. During a second interview, Lyla's daughter, Lyla Porter, also provided crucial information. She recalled hearing her mother arguing with Alan in the kitchen just days before the murder. Although Emily couldn't hear the entire argument, her mother's voice was sharp and angry, while Alan's was low and strained. Lyla stormed upstairs, slamming the bedroom door, and Alan left without saying goodbye. These details, combined with Lyla's emails in which she threatened to expose their relationship to Deborah, paint a clear picture of a relationship spiraling out of control. Detective Garrett Lynch begins to understand the whole picture. Alan fears his reputation and the complete collapse of his marriage. He has the motive, the means, and now the opportunity to silence Lyla once and for all. As the evidence mounts, the pressure on Alan increases. Colleagues who once respected him began to distance themselves, and rumors of the investigation spread throughout the department. Although the details remain under wraps, the media begins to sense something is amiss. Alan's calm exterior begins to crack. He avoids contact with his colleagues, withdraws into himself, and keeps in touch only with his immediate family. Detective Lynch, however, was in no rush to arrest Alan. He knew the case would be closely watched and wanted to ensure the evidence was impeccable. The investigation continued, but one thing was clear. The ring was closing in on Alan Hayes. As the case entered its third week, Lynch wondered, why now? What could have driven a man as exemplary as Alan to risk everything in an act of violence? The answer lay not in his personal feelings or reputation, but in his financial records. Lynch sent a junior detective to dig into Alan's financial records, bank statements, and credit history, and on March 1, 2008, they made a shocking discovery. Just a month before the murder, Alan's wife, Deborah Hayes, had inherited $500,000 from her father, a wealthy businessman. Not only was the sum large, but it also had a crucial condition. If Deborah filed for divorce, Alan would lose access to it altogether. This was no longer just a case of reputation or broken marriage. It was a case of financial survival. The consequences would be disastrous if Lyla carried out her threat and revealed their relationship to Deborah. Deborah would surely leave Alan. His career would be irreparably damaged, and most importantly, the $500,000 would be gone forever. Driven to the limit, Alan had reached his breaking point. But an unexpected event occurred just as the investigative team began to build up their case against Alan. The shadow of suspicion suddenly turned to Deborah Hayes, the woman at the center of Alan's potential breakdown. Previously a non-suspect, she maintained a calm and composed demeanor throughout the investigation. She told detectives that she had been home with her children on the evening of February 11, 2008, helping them with their homework and preparing for a church charity event. But as Lynch and his team dug deeper, cracks began to appear in Deborah's story. On March 1, 2008, a key witness came forward, claiming to have seen a car similar to Deborah's parked near Lyla's home on the night of the murder. The witness's description was specific enough to be striking: a black sedan with a bumper sticker from a local Christian school, precisely like the car Deborah drove. The timeline matched Lyla's estimated time of death, making the possibility that Deborah had confronted Lyla herself a serious possibility. Detectives wondered, had Deborah discovered the affair and decided to take matters into her own hands? There was no denying that she had a strong motive. The affair was not only a betrayal of her marriage, but also of her family, her reputation, and the carefully constructed life she believed to be secure. Deborah was known to have a temper, and several of her acquaintances had hinted at a dark side beneath the elegant exterior and perfect image she maintained. Had she known of Lyla's existence, her rage might have driven her to the point of losing control, with devastating consequences. But at the same time, there was reason to doubt Deborah's involvement. She had no history of violence, and she had cooperated, if reluctantly, throughout the investigation. Deborah's alibi was not solid, but her eldest son confirmed that his mother had been home that night. Still, the slight possibility that she was involved in the crime forced detectives to widen their search, even as the evidence against Alan continued to mount. By March 8, 2008, the case against Alan Hayes reached a critical turning point. Forensic analysis of the bullet recovered from Lyla Porter's body confirmed what detectives had suspected all along. The bullet had come from a gun belonging to Alan Hayes. The weapon Alan had reported missing a week before the murder had been found at the scene, carefully placed in a position that suggested a suicide. But the detail that left Alan unable to defend himself was his fingerprints on the butt of the gun, incontrovertible evidence. The final nail in Alan's coffin came from the surveillance footage. Detectives pieced together Alan's route the night of the murder, and all the clues pointed straight to him. The truth was finally out, and Alan Hayes would not escape the consequences of what he had done. The investigation continued to track Alan Hayes' car, showing that during the crucial hours of the night of the murder, he had been just blocks away from Lyla Porter's home. Gunpowder residue found on Alan's jacket only added to the incriminating evidence, solidifying the timeline of his presence at the scene. While Allen maintained his innocence, claiming that the evidence was circumstantial, to Detective Garrett Lynch and the investigation team, the truth was clear. Allen not only had the motive but also the means and the perfect opportunity to kill Lyla Porter. The arrest was made early on March 8, 2008, while the Hayes family was still asleep. Lynch decided to arrest in the early morning hours, hoping to minimize the scene's impact on Allen's 2 young sons. But no amount of planning could have prepared him for the shock that was to come. When the police arrived at Allen's suburban home, Deborah answered the door. She looked dazed and disoriented in her robe and slippers. She was given a moment to process what was happening before Allen was handcuffed and led outside. The children, awakened by the noise, stood at the top of the stairs, pale with fear and confusion. Deborah's expression changed, from shock to anger. But no one could tell whether the anger was directed at Allen or the police officers. Allen kept calm as he was ushered into the back of the patrol car, but his eyes betrayed the rising panic. Meanwhile, neighbors peeked through the curtains, some stepping out onto the porch and whispering. The man who had once been admired, the model cop, was now a man engulfed in scandal and suspicion. The life he had carefully built had been shattered before everyone's eyes. At the police station, Allen is formally charged with first-degree murder. Throughout his detention and interrogation, he remains eerily silent, a stark contrast to his earlier defiant demeanor during interrogation. When confronted with the charges, Allen immediately asks for a lawyer, but the facts are indisputable. The evidence against him is overwhelming and irrefutable. Although Deborah was initially questioned as a potential accomplice, she was not formally implicated due to a lack of concrete evidence. However, her role in the case remains a mystery. Was she complicit in covering up Allen's actions? Or was she just another victim of her husband's lies and betrayals? This question continues to haunt both the investigation team and the community. As the sun rises over the quiet streets of Hanover, the town is in shock. The arrest of Allen Hayes, a once respected man, marked the beginning of a long and painful journey for all involved. For Detective Lynch, the case is not yet closed. But one thing is sure: the web of love, lies, and betrayal that led to Lyla Porter's death has forever changed the lives of those left behind. The trial of Allen Hayes began in August 2009, drawing national attention to a case that had shaken the small community of Hanover, New Hampshire. The courtroom was packed with reporters, curious locals, and those directly affected by the tragedy. All were waiting to hear the fate of the man once hailed as a hero in the police force. Allen Hayes, once a model cop, now sat at the defendant's table, facing justice. Gone was the neat, tidy image of his days, replaced by a grim, stoic face, weighed down by his poor choices. His every move was tense, his eyes downcast as the prosecution laid bare the web of betrayal, deceit, and murder he had created. Assistant District Attorney Marlene Carson, the prosecution, is a seasoned lawyer known for her ruthlessness in high-profile cases. In her opening statement to the jury, she portrayed Allen as a desperate man who had turned to crime to save himself, regardless of the consequences. Assistant District Attorney Marlene Carson methodically builds the story of a state trooper's downfall. This man risked everything to have an affair with a coworker, only to kill her when she became a threat to the life he had carefully built. Carson focuses on Allen Hayes' financial motive, emphasizing that Deborah Hayes' $500,000 inheritance was a significant factor and the cause of Allen's fall into despair. A divorce would not only expose the affair, but strip away the financial stability Allen had been clinging to. The prosecution's case relied heavily on forensic evidence, and Carson laid out each piece meticulously. The bullet found in Lyla Porter's body was a ballistic match to Allen's service gun, which he had reported missing just a week before the murder. Gunpowder residue was found on Allen's jacket, and surveillance footage showed him near Lyla's house the night of the murder. All painted a portrait of a man driven to the wall, trapped by his lies, and ultimately driven mad by a need to protect his reputation at all costs. One of the most pivotal moments of the trial came when Emily Porter, Lyla's teenage daughter, took the stand. Emily's testimony was heartbreaking, revealing the emotional toll the murder had taken on her life. Before the jury, Emily recounted the arguments she had overheard between her mother and Alan in the weeks leading up to the murder. Her voice trembled, but she remained calm as she described how her mother had become increasingly anxious and angry, pacing the house late at night, clearly struggling with fear and frustration. Emily's testimony gave the jury a glimpse into Lyla's final days, a life filled with anxiety and despair, as she realized that her failed relationship with Alan had led her down a dangerous path. But more importantly, Emily shed light on the extent of the tension between Alan and her mother, particularly a heated argument just days before the murder, when Alan's tone grew angry. At the same time, Lyla was firm but also frightened. Emily didn't understand all the details then, but now her account adds a deeply personal and emotional layer to the prosecution's case. The courtroom fell eerily silent as Emily, who now lives with her aunt and uncle, began to cry. She cried not only for the loss of her mother, but also for the betrayal that had destroyed her family. Everyone present could feel the deep pain the young woman was carrying. While the prosecution painted a clear picture of a murder out of desperation, the defense, led by attorney Paul Grayson, did its best to undermine that argument. Grayson, a lawyer known for his calm and calculating demeanor, entered the legal battle with a single goal: to sow doubt in the prosecution's case. But with so much evidence piling up, can he turn the tide? Attorney Paul Grayson, representing the defense, argued that Alan Hayes was being framed. He attempted to shift the blame onto Deborah Hayes, questioning her whereabouts on the night of the murder, and emphasizing the jealousy that may have motivated her actions. Grayson claimed that Deborah had more to lose emotionally than Alan, portraying her as an unstable woman driven to desperate measures when she learned of the affair. Grayson also attacked the forensic evidence, arguing that the crime scene had been tampered with or mishandled by investigators. He asserted that Alan's fingerprints on the gun could have been an accidental transfer, and that gunpowder residue on Alan's jacket was not conclusive evidence. His tactic was straightforward: to sow reasonable doubt in the jury's mind, turning the case from a clear-cut crime into a story full of holes. The defense's strategy, however, collapsed when Deborah Hayes testified under immunity. Deborah's testimony became a defining moment in the trial. Taking the stand, Deborah was calm but shaken. She portrayed herself as a betrayed wife, struggling with the humiliation of discovering her husband's infidelity. She admitted that she had known about the affair shortly before Lyla's murder, but she had chosen to confront Alan privately rather than act out of anger. Deborah's calm and consistent testimony undermined the defense's attempt to cast her as a suspect. Instead of being a jealous and dangerous woman, she emerged as a victim, a woman betrayed and caught up in her husband's web of lies. More importantly, Deborah's testimony also shed light on Alan's volatile demeanor in the weeks leading up to the murder. She described a restless and withdrawn man who frequently left the house late at night without explanation. For the first time, the jury saw Alan's transformation from a respected police officer to a desperate man struggling to regain control of his life. Deborah told the jury that despite her efforts to save the marriage for the sake of her children, she felt Alan was losing control. By the time the prosecution closed its case, the jury had a damning portrait of Alan Hayes, a man driven to the brink of death, willing to kill to hide a secret and protect a life he did not want to lose. Stay tuned for more stories that peel back the layers of human behavior, exposing the darkest corners of the human heart. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated with our daily stories. Share your thoughts in the comments below.